The disguise. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Olivia Prescott's Boston apartment as she stood before her mirror, methodically transforming herself. At 38, she was one of the city's most formidable civil rights attorneys, with a reputation that preceded her in courtrooms across New England. But today, she wasn't dressing for success. She pulled her normally styled hair into a simple bun, removed her signature pearl earrings, and traded her tailored suit for a modest beige sweater and simple black pants. Even her designer frames were replaced with an older, more subdued pair. "This has to work," she whispered to herself, studying her reflection. For 3 months, she'd been preparing for this moment. Representatives from Riverside Gardens, a retirement community housing primarily lower-income seniors, had approached her with a desperate plea. Westlake Development had set their sights on the property, intending to build luxury condominiums. Through dubious means and legal loopholes, they were close to forcing out dozens of elderly residents. The case had already been before Judge Arthur Coleman once, presented by a high-profile attorney who'd been practically laughed out of court. That's when Olivia had been called in. But she knew appearing as herself wouldn't work. Judge Coleman had a notorious reputation. Corporate cases almost always swung in favor of big business, especially when argued by female attorneys whom he seemingly viewed as less competent by default. "If he sees another polished Harvard attorney walking in, his mind will be made up before I speak," she had explained to her colleague Marcus. Marcus had been skeptical. "So your plan is to what, pretend to be inexperienced?" "I'm not going to lie," she had clarified. "I'm just not going to correct assumptions. I've just moved to this jurisdiction, he doesn't know me yet." Now, as she gathered her deliberately worn leather briefcase, Olivia mentally reviewed her strategy. Today wasn't about winning outright, it was about laying groundwork, getting Coleman to underestimate her. Then, when the time was right, she would reveal her true capabilities. Her phone buzzed with a text from Gloria Winters, the 78-year-old resident who had become the face of Riverside Gardens. "Fight, we're all counting on you, dear. God bless." Olivia took a deep breath. She wasn't just fighting for a legal victory, she was fighting for people's homes, their dignity, their community. First impressions. At the courthouse, Olivia blended seamlessly into the crowd. Nothing about her commanded attention. Several attorneys nodded politely but distantly as she passed, none recognizing her as the same Olivia Prescott who had successfully argued before the Supreme Court 2 years prior. Inside the courtroom, she spotted the opposition, 3 Westlake attorneys in impeccable suits, led by Richard Daniels, known for his aggressive tactics and deep corporate connections. He barely glanced at her as she took her seat at the plaintiff's table. "Are you the paralegal?" he asked dismissively. "I'm representing Riverside Gardens today," she replied simply. Daniels smirked, turning back to his colleagues with a poorly concealed chuckle. His body language screamed, "This will be easy." Gloria and 5 other elderly residents filed in, sitting directly behind Olivia. Gloria squeezed her shoulder. "Thank you for taking this on, Miss Prescott. We couldn't afford another big-name lawyer after the last one." Olivia smiled reassuringly. Sometimes the unexpected approach works best. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Arthur Coleman." Coleman entered, his tall frame and silver hair giving him a commanding presence. His eyes, cold and assessing, swept over the courtroom before he took his seat. He shuffled papers for a moment before looking up, his gaze landing first on Daniels and his team with something like collegial recognition. Then his eyes shifted to Olivia, narrowing slightly. "I see we have new counsel for the plaintiffs," he remarked, making no effort to mask the skepticism in his voice. "Let's hope we don't waste the court's time today." Olivia maintained a neutral expression, knowing the performance had already begun. She had studied 16 of Coleman's previous cases involving housing disputes. She knew his tendencies, his biases, and most importantly, his blind spots. "Your Honor," she said, making her voice just slightly less confident than her usual courtroom tone, "we're prepared to proceed." Coleman looked at her over his reading glasses. "Are you?" We'll see about that. The humiliation. Richard Daniels presented his case with the polish of a corporate attorney who'd never lost a night's sleep over the human cost of his victories. His argument was smooth, well-rehearsed, and laden with legal terminology designed to impress. Your Honor, Westlake Development has followed every regulation to the letter. The zoning change was approved by the City Council. The property's current use is simply no longer economically viable, Daniels concluded with practiced sincerity. Judge Coleman nodded appreciatively. Thank you, Mr. Daniels. Clear and concise, as always. He then turned to Olivia, his expression shifting to one of thinly veiled impatience. Ms. Prescott, your response. Olivia stood, deliberately arranging her notes with slightly fumbling fingers, a small performance for her audience of one. She noticed Coleman checking his watch. Your Honor, she began, her voice steady but lacking the commanding presence she typically brought to courtrooms. Riverside Gardens has been home to over 60 senior citizens for more than 20 years. The residents have legal leases that. Ms. Prescott, Coleman interrupted, I'm well aware of what a lease is. What I need are legal arguments, not emotional appeals. Several of the Westlake attorneys smirked, exactly as Olivia had anticipated. Of course, Your Honor. I apologize, she said, appearing slightly flustered. The residents contest the validity of the zoning change on the grounds that proper notification procedures weren't followed. Coleman sighed audibly. And your evidence for this claim? We have affidavits from residents stating they never received the legally required notices, Olivia responded, sliding documents forward. Affidavits can be prepared by anyone, Miss Prescott, Daniels interjected. Your Honor, we have signed receipts showing all notifications were delivered as required by statute. Coleman nodded. Indeed, Miss Prescott. This seems like a straightforward matter of documentation, which your clients lack. Olivia hesitated deliberately, then pressed on. Your Honor, there's also the matter of the historical significance of the property, which would require additional review before redevelopment. The judge removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. Miss Prescott, is this your first major case? The courtroom fell silent. Even Daniels looked uncomfortable at the direct confrontation. I've handled various matters, Your Honor, Olivia answered truthfully, if incompletely. I thought as much, Coleman said with evident condescension. Let me explain something. Perhaps in law school they told you that passion counts for something in court. It doesn't. Evidence does. Precedent does. And so far, you've presented me with neither. The elderly residents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Gloria's face had fallen. Do you have actual legal arguments to present, Coleman continued, or shall we end this exercise? Olivia remained standing, absorbing the humiliation without visible reaction. This was the moment she'd expected, Coleman putting her in her place, establishing dominance, showing everyone that a simple-looking woman couldn't possibly challenge the system he represented. Your Honor, she began, her voice soft, may I have a moment to address the court's concerns directly? The revelation. Coleman waved his hand dismissively. By all means, Miss Prescott. Though I hope you have something more substantial than what we've heard so far. Olivia straightened, and something subtle shifted in her posture. Her voice, when she spoke again, carried a different quality, confident, precise, commanding. Your Honor, you're absolutely right that evidence and precedent matter. So let me present both. She opened her briefcase with practiced efficiency. In the 1987 case of Morrison v. City Planning Commission, this very court established that notification requirements must be substantially complied with, to ensure due process. The signed receipts my opposing counsel references are dated 3 days after the legal deadline, hardly substantial compliance. Daniels frowned, quickly shuffling through his papers. Coleman's eyebrows rose slightly. Furthermore, Olivia continued, her tone now crisp and authoritative, the historical significance I mentioned isn't mere sentiment. Riverside Gardens was built in 1952 as part of the Federal Housing Act's provisions for senior citizens. Under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, any federal undertaking affecting properties over 50 years old requires consultation with the State Historic Preservation Office. This consultation never occurred. She placed a thick document on the clerk's desk. This is correspondence from the Massachusetts Historical Commission confirming that no such consultation took place, making the current proceedings legally deficient. The courtroom was dead silent. Coleman's condescending expression had vanished, replaced by sharp attention. Daniels was frantically whispering to his associates. Additionally, Olivia pressed on, now fully in her element. The zoning change my opponent's claim is valid was passed by a city council lacking proper quorum. Municipal Law Section 23A requires 2/3 of elected officials to be present for zoning decisions. Only 4 of 7 council members were present that evening, as documented in the official minutes. She produced another document. This affidavit from the city clerk confirms the quorum violation, rendering the zoning change void ab initio, void from the beginning. Coleman leaned forward, his earlier dismissiveness completely gone. Ms. Prescott, these are substantial arguments. How did you? Furthermore, Your Honor, Olivia interrupted smoothly, Westlake Development failed to file the required environmental impact assessment. Massachusetts General Law Chapter 30, Section 61 mandates environmental review for any project displacing more than 50 residents. Their own documents show 63 residents would be displaced. Daniels shot to his feet. Your Honor, these are technical violations at best. Technical violations that render your entire proceeding legally invalid. Olivia cut him off, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had argued before the highest courts in the land. But let's discuss the real issue here, the pattern of targeting low-income senior housing for development without proper legal compliance. She turned to face the courtroom, her transformation complete. This isn't the first time Westlake has used these tactics. In 2019, they attempted similar maneuvers against Sunset Manor in Springfield. In 2021, it was Golden Years Community in Worcester. Each time, the same shortcuts, the same disregard for proper procedure, the same assumption that elderly residents lack the resources to fight back. Coleman's face had grown pale. Ms. Prescott, who exactly are you? Olivia smiled, not the tentative expression she'd worn earlier, but the confident smile of someone accustomed to winning. I'm Olivia Prescott, senior partner at Prescott & Associates, former clerk to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and the attorney who successfully argued the landmark housing rights case of Henderson v. Metropolitan Development before the Supreme Court. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Daniels sank into his chair, his face ashen. Justice served. The courtroom erupted. Reporters in the gallery began furiously scribbling notes. Gloria and the other residents stared in amazement at the woman who had just revealed herself to be one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the country. Judge Coleman's face cycled through several emotions, shock, embarrassment, and finally, grudging respect. Ms. Prescott. I owe you an apology. Your reputation precedes you, though obviously not in the way I expected. No apology necessary, Your Honor, Olivia replied graciously. Sometimes assumptions need to be challenged. I trust the court will now give proper consideration to the legal arguments presented. Coleman cleared his throat, his entire demeanor changed. Indeed. Mr. Daniels, in light of the substantial procedural violations Ms. Prescott has outlined, how does your client propose to proceed? Daniels stood shakily. Your Honor, perhaps we could request a continuance to address these technical issues. Technical issues? Olivia's voice carried a hint of steel. Your Honor, these aren't technicalities, they're fundamental violations of due process, environmental law, and municipal procedure. My clients have suffered months of uncertainty and stress because Westlake Development chose to circumvent proper legal channels. She walked to the residence section, placing a gentle hand on Gloria's shoulder. These people deserve more than delay tactics. They deserve justice. Coleman nodded slowly. Ms. Prescott is correct. Mr. Daniels, given the comprehensive nature of the procedural violations, I'm issuing an immediate injunction against all development activities on the Riverside Gardens property." The elderly residents gasped with joy. Gloria grabbed Olivia's hand, tears streaming down her face. "Furthermore," Coleman continued, "I'm ordering a full investigation into Westlake Development's practices in this and other similar cases. If a pattern of legal violations is established, this court will pursue appropriate sanctions." Daniels tried one last time. "Your Honor, surely we can reach some accommodation." "Mr. Daniels," Coleman's voice was firm, "the time for accommodation was before your client decided to bulldoze through legal requirements. This court finds in favor of the plaintiffs. The zoning change is voided, the development is permanently enjoined, and Westlake Development will pay all legal costs incurred by the residents." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Gloria hugged Olivia tightly. "I don't know how to thank you, dear. You saved our home." "You don't need to thank me," Olivia replied, her voice warm. "This is what justice looks like." As the courtroom cleared, Judge Coleman approached Olivia. "Ms. Prescott, I must say, you've taught me a valuable lesson today. I allowed my preconceptions to cloud my judgment, and I treated you poorly as a result." Olivia nodded. "Your Honor, we all make assumptions. The key is being willing to acknowledge them and learn from them." Coleman extended his hand. "I hope you'll consider appearing before my court again, as yourself, of course." "I'd be honored, Your Honor." Outside the courthouse, Olivia changed back into her regular attire, her transformation complete. But the real change had occurred inside, not just in her, but in everyone who witnessed what happened when someone dared to challenge assumptions and fight for what was right. 6 months later, Westlake Development faced federal charges for housing discrimination. Judge Coleman implemented new procedures to ensure fair treatment of all attorneys regardless of appearance or background. And Riverside Gardens remained home to its residents, who now had a garden named in honor of the woman who saved their community. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon against injustice is simply refusing to be underestimated. Olivia Prescott had proven that truth, appearances can be deceiving, and justice sometimes comes dressed in a simple beige sweater. The end.